Probably fairly bearish on the overall state of the U.S. economy right now. I would say that the biggest thing that the country is currently facing is some long-term structural issues around longer-term unemployment. I think as we've seen from the crisis starting in late 2008, that unemployment has stayed high, that the average length of stay for people on unemployment has increased. I think we have the largest number of people that have been unemployed for over 30 or 40 weeks of any time since the government's been tracking data. And I think that's a testament that there's a whole segment of people today who have a very tough time finding how their skills match up with what is needed inside the U.S. economy. And I think that's a structural problem that takes a long time for us to fix. And I think it's symptomatic of some of the benefits that we're seeing in the economy. And Tashi and I have talked about this on the side before around the role that software is playing inside the economy. If you think about it, beginning in the agricultural revolution, we were an agrarian society for a long period of time, and that we were able to develop ways to mechanize our agricultural force and move people out of the agricultural field into cities, into more productive capacities. That then spurred the Industrial Revolution, which allowed people to be more productive inside of factory jobs. Then we didn't need people to spend all their time hammering tools and building things. We could automate more and more of that. And as a result, we've moved into a service-oriented culture and a service-oriented economy. And what we're seeing now is software is replacing more and more of the services that we currently have. And I think there's the issue that people need to start addressing is what is going to replace the service economy, or what is going to how are people going to find jobs inside this new reality where software is taking up a larger and larger share of the overall. Yeah, and in a sense, in an agrarian, when that became mechanized, you had a similar thing where tools replaced people. In the Industrial Revolution, and even in the more recent time period, you had machines, and more recently robots have replaced people. Now you have software replacing people on the service side. And I'm sure at each of these critical junctures, the beauty of capitalism is that in a sense it's able to bring about productivity increases, and it's a way to people want to work. And so as people need work, the economy has always found a way and a need for those people. And so there's always been friction kind of at these different time periods. And I think we're at a point now where that friction exists. My only concern is that I just don't see a natural progression right now of what people need. Mm-hmm. If you think about the jobs that are in demand, these are high-tech, high-skilled, kind of high-thought jobs. There's a huge need for someone like product engineers. If you talk to a Silicon Valley startup or startup anywhere, they'll say they desperately need software engineers. They need people who can write code. They need computer savvy people. If you talk, everyone likes to talk about big data or data analytics right now, and so you need data scientists, and you need statisticians, and you need people who understand how data can scale. Mm-hmm. Those are not run-of-the-mill type jobs. Those are highly specialized, high IQ type jobs, and those are not things that the average marginal person can be adapted to. So when I think about software is replacing more and more low-skilled jobs, and it's taking longer and longer for that the marginal worker to ramp up their skill set to be able to function inside of an economy where software is taking more things. And so I think if we're going to find ways to improve productivity while simultaneously improving employment, one of the things that software is going to need to do is either is find a way to make the average person able to use that software more intuitively. Yeah, you need to have a deeper understanding of the software, but also the people who are currently designing software need to find ways to make it more accessible to the average person. So, for concepts, big statistical concepts, currently you need people with heavy statistics background to be able to function. Can we abstract that and say, well, let's basically codify all of that statistics expertise so that then the average person using the software doesn't have to know statistics, they just need to learn how to use this particular app. Because then that maybe that takes a problem that needed a high IQ type person with a ton of background, a ton of education to be able to do, and brings it more accessible to the average person. If I think simplistically here, we've had, in the U.S., in Europe, this is a very similar situation where consumers had homes that they thought were worth a bunch. Now they're worth a lot less, and so they've lost a lot of money. But they haven't taken a lot of losses. Those losses were kind of foisted upon banks because you can't sue. Consumers can declare bankruptcy, and they didn't put any money up. They can't really lose any money. Yeah. But that home is worth less. Someone has to eat those losses. The banks ended up eating a bunch of those losses. But the banks, obviously couldn't afford to lose all that money. So what do? You go and bail out the banks. And so, it's necessary. The banks probably would have gone bankrupt without it. But what you've done is now you've transferred liability from, first from people to the banks. Now you transferred liability from the banks to the countries. Yeah. And now in Europe, we've got a situation where the countries are having too much debt. They don't have the current income to support their current debt levels. And people and governments have gotten very comfortable living a certain lifestyle that was based upon the ability to continue borrowing more debt. Mm-hmm. And no one wants to take a cut in their standard of living. And so there's a cognitive dissonance, whatever you want to call it, of we've been living effectively on borrowed time for a long period of time, and you can't do that forever. And that day of reckoning is kind of moving closer and closer to Europe. I heard a CEO of a startup in Silicon Valley say that they just opened an office in London, and the London reporter is asking, what is the difference between a startup in London and a startup in Silicon Valley? And they talked a little bit about regulations and that sort of thing. But the most interesting was that she said in London there was a view that failure as a startup carries a really heavy weight to it, that it is not acceptable to fail. Whereas in Silicon Valley, people routinely start 4 and 5 companies that don't go anywhere and fail, and the 6th is, this huge hit. Yeah, and it's hard to get a job. Yeah. So as a result, that kind of, the pride of being an entrepreneur, the pride to try and start something, the recognition that you have to fail. If you're not failing, then you're not trying hard enough. You're not taking a big enough risk. That's a very U.S. I think that extends to life outside of the VC world. America is a much more risk-taking environment, and that means that investors are willing to take risks. That means that people are willing to take risks with their own time and startups. And they're willing to be more mobile. They're willing to adapt at a high. The high-functioning people are willing to adapt to new situation, and we take less vacation days. I don't think private equity has ever been thought of in its purpose as this is a tool to create jobs. I don't think that's ever been the primary motivation. What it has been is it's been growth and improvement in company performance. I think job growth is a natural byproduct of trying to help companies grow. I think to say, I think for someone like Mitt Romney to say something that we are in the job creation business, that's probably a little too strong. They're in the investment business and trying to create successful returns for investors by trying to help companies grow and improve their internal operations. Job growth is kind of a natural part of that. It is by far the exception, as opposed to the rule in private equity, that you would look at a business and think we should cut jobs to be able to get a return here. The economy, the private equity industry today is very competitive. You have to pay high multiples. companies are very expensive. In order to get the returns that we need, we have to find ways to help companies grow. It is almost impossible to help companies grow while simultaneously saying we need to cut employment. The average private equity return is better than the S&P 500, but it is not 2 and 3 times the size of the S&P 500. In a similar way, the average private equity firm probably does an okay job creating jobs, but not orders of magnitude. Now, really strong private equity firms consistently beat the returns of the S&P 500 because their companies consistently grow faster.
Exactly.
Those are the types of funds that would be able to show, marketed improvement in employment. I think there are 2 broad buckets of PE firms that are going to be successful. There are large firms that have built internal processes and controls around that will be capable of doing a high volume of deals at relatively kind of low margin, in the sense that that as returns are probably going to be shrinking because this market is more competitive now than it was 10 years ago. So you need to be an efficient fund that has resources available to improve the companies that you're buying, so that your returns are having to come more from operational improvement as opposed to luck of the draw, so to speak. So I think it needs to be a large firm that is has internal controls and is scalable and is able to invest their internal dollars on an operating team and operating partners that can help improve overall operations. I think the second one is almost at the exact opposite in the spectrum. It will be smaller firms that have deep relationships with their kind of local market and with entrepreneurs and with potential investors, and can effectively find and partner with teams at a price that is better than what they would have to pay inside of a broad auction. And it's that relationship that will drive the ability to find deals at attractive prices. But that's not scalable. You're going to have a handful of those. You can't build a large fund around the idea we're going to pay less than the average person would have to pay on deals. Yeah, so I grew up in Tennessee. Actually was born in a small town, like 30,000 people, outside of Nashville, Tennessee. Have always lived in the South. Have always lived in a pretty narrow kind of latitudinal band. I was in Nashville, and then went to undergrad in South Carolina, grad school in North Carolina, and lived in Charlotte, North Carolina for 4 years. So have stayed in the South my whole time. But I've always wanted to come up and live in New York. I spent a summer up here when I was in college. Have tried to find jobs at various times through my career in New York. Having been interested in finance, it's obviously the place to be. And I was very excited about being up in New York. And I think it's funny when I first got to New York and was telling people what I liked about it. You say the kind of cheesy things like, it's just such a big city.
Skyscrapers are big.
There's such an energy around the city. The restaurants are so great. There's always tons of fun stuff to do. There's like great museums. There's Central Park is so much fun, and all of those are still true. But I think one of the things I'm appreciating more about it is the type of people I meet are all generally very interesting. Kind of type A, motivated, kind of hard-charging people. Some could say, in general, New Yorkers are fairly neurotic, which is probably not too far off the case. But it attracts a certain type of people that are very interesting in the sense that they're trying to pursue something. This is not an easy city to live in or come to, and so you have to really want it. The friends I have here I find to be very thoughtful, very interesting. Not to say that friends in other cities that I've lived in have not been, but it's a very dynamic, very engaging city, and that's been one of the more exciting things I've seen. The other side is that it's a center of a lot of cultural capital, a lot of a lot of things that are happening in New York trickle down to the rest of the country, and so to be able to kind of be in the center of like a real cultural center is fun and fascinating.